I feel like my intuition and like my genuine curiosity like show up no matter what I'm doing. And so when I'm moderating my Facebook group, those same things are showing up, so those are the things that make me a good therapist, but I think are also the things that make me, successful and effective in the other things that I'm doing in this part of my business as well.
This is Therapist Clubhouse, a podcast for private practice entrepreneurs. I'm Annie Schusler. This week, I'm talking to my first repeat guest, Dr. Joy Harden Bradford, a private practice entrepreneur with a growing empire located in Atlanta, Georgia. The platform she created, Therapy for Black Girls, has been growing exponentially. Listen to what that's been like for her, what's changing, and what she's not going to change. Welcome back, Dr. Joy. Thank you so much for coming back to talk to me.
I'm happy to join you again, Annie.
I'm so excited. You are my first repeat guest.
Woohoo!
And so much has changed.
Indeed.
So when we talked over a year ago, your podcast was really new and you had already been featured in Essence. So things were already moving. But now your directory, Therapy for Black Girls, has been growing. Your podcast has blown up. You've got fans like Gabrielle Union.
I wouldn't say fans, Annie.
No? What would you say?
Well, they have shared the directory. So I don't know if it's fans, but they have definitely shared the directory.
And you've been featured in O and the Washington Post and Ebony and lots of other places. So things have really been just growing and growing exponentially. And so I just want to talk about what has this been like for you to know that you're impacting so many people and to see your business really growing into a movement for Black women and girls. What is it like?
Yeah, I mean, a host of different things, Annie, honestly. So mostly excitement and just oh my gosh, this is a big deal. Yeah. But also very overwhelming. And, it feels like I'm building a completely different business than the one I was building when we last talked, which has caused me to have to stretch and learn different things and not even know what I don't know yet. So, it has been a lot of things, but mostly exciting.
And tell me a little bit about that stretching. What have you noticed you had to learn that you didn't know you would have to learn?
Well, I felt like I had a pretty good grasp on how to have a private practice business, right? The marketing that had to happen to fill your caseload and, okay, these are the things that you do. And, I felt like I had a good handle on that. But now my actual practice is such a small fraction of what I do. So figuring out how to market to reach therapists to get them listed in the directory, which I still don't really have a good grasp on. Most of it has just been word of mouth and people saying oh, I've gotten so many clients, you should join too, which I mean, I guess organic is the best, right? But that is a very different element and not anything that I learned in school. And so, having to pay attention to people in different niches and read different kinds of things and take different kinds of classes has just really forced me to kind of, go looking for this other world of knowledge that I didn't ever think I would need.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of your listeners are not therapists. What, so you can't see all of them in therapy.
Right, clearly.
I'm pretty sure you're over full. So how does your business work in that way? In terms of is there any way that you monetize just how huge the podcast is becoming?
Yeah, so I definitely have sponsors for some of the podcast episodes, but I'm very picky about sponsors because of who I am, and I do still have a license to protect. So I don't feel like it would be appropriate to just have random kinds of sponsors. So I'm very I feel critical in particular in terms of the kinds of sponsors that I do allow to advertise on the podcast. To me, it has to feel like a very good fit. And so far, the sponsors I've worked with have been excellent, and I feel excellent matches for my audience. So that has been really good.
Yeah, because you're really protective of them, I imagine. That I just heard this statistic recently that when the average person, when they tune into a podcast, there's an 85% chance that they're going to listen to the whole podcast. And so it's like your listeners are so precious and their time is so precious that I can see how you've wanted to be really careful and
Yeah, and
protective.
I feel like because of the topic, also, I'm talking about some, sometimes really entertaining, but also some really heavy stuff sometimes, and people's traumas and family histories and those kinds of things. And so I feel like there's an additional layer of protectiveness I have about my audience that I want to be very careful that they know that they can trust me for like accurate information, and that if I share their ears with a sponsor, that it's something that I do actually believe in and I think could help them in some way.
Yeah. And so what are the things that you've been doing day to day, week to week that are, different than what you expected, that are, related to growing and engaging with your audience?
Yeah, so my current task has been learning more about like email marketing and like managing not a newsletter, like your email list and stuff like that. So I was originally with one company, but now my list has grown and is expanding in different ways. And so it felt like I needed something different. So now I'm relearning everything I thought I knew about like email marketing and that kind of stuff. So that has been the newest thing. But I also have had to learn how to be very focused in terms of my schedule and like doing certain things on certain days. Because I think for a while I was kind of just switching between tasks like every day, and that left me feeling like just incredibly frazzled at the end of the day. So now I, try to do recording of my own podcast on Wednesdays. I do interviews typically on Mondays and Thursdays. Tuesdays is my practice day. And Fridays I try to leave for like nothing except myself. And, to kind of have a day off to do, stuff with myself and my kids and husband. So it feels like I've had to be very focused in getting a schedule down that really works for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I also do therapy on Tuesdays.
Oh,
it's really interesting. Yeah.
It has been like that for a while. Like ever since I've been in college counseling centers, like Tuesdays has always been like my half day or whatever day to like see clients, and it just stuck.
Yeah. So what was it like to cut back on your therapy sessions?
I thought I would have more trouble with it than I feel like I am. But I also feel like I really enjoy this other work that I'm doing now. And so maybe the excitement is just kind of taking over, right? And like in a year or so, I'll be like, no, I want my clients back. But it has been an easier transition than I thought that it would. I'm also wanting to, so another thing that I'm really passionate about in terms of clinical work is group. And so I had a group for a little while, but like the times weren't working for everybody. But I really, really love group therapy. And so I'm really wanting to add that back into my schedule, but I'm thinking of doing more kind of like day long or half day intensive kinds of groups, as opposed to like ongoing things that would hopefully work better for people in their schedules.
Oh, that's great. So it could be perhaps like either a 1 day or a several day workshop.
That's what I'm thinking.
That is cool. And people are going to be flying in for that. So,
well, that could be.
They absolutely will, because you're huge and people are going to want to have a chance to get to work with you. So one thing I'm thinking too, when you say it's felt pretty good cutting back on therapy, even though you still really love it, it makes me think like, well, you're still using so many of those parts of you in the other work you're doing. Like when I listen to your interview style, like I know you're not being a therapist on your podcast, but you're using so many of those same superpowers.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I feel like everywhere I show up, and I feel like that's why I love like the framework that you use to help like therapists find their niche, because it does feel like it's a superpower that you kind of innately had, right? Like, and so I feel like my intuition and like my genuine curiosity like show up no matter what I'm doing. And so when I'm moderating my Facebook group, those same things are showing up, so those are the things that make me a good therapist, but I think are also the things that make me, successful and effective in the other things that I'm doing in this part of my business as well.
Yeah. What do you think is coming through for you as the most important values for you in your business that you kind of, notice that you have to hold on to as it grows, or that are really important for you to hold on to as it grows?
I think what has been most important for me has been the community piece. And I feel like, whatever new adventures or new endeavors I kind of add to therapy for Black girls, like I really feel like I want that to be the core of it. Because it does feel like, the Thrive Tribe is what the Facebook group is called. There are 15,000 members, I think, at this point, and it's a very active group. And so they are a lot of the listeners. And then, there are other people on Twitter and Instagram that make up the community. And it feels like that really is the heart of the business. And so that's what I've realized is what people are really craving more than the information is the community piece. And so I feel like that's what I'm really wanting to kind of make sure I never lose focus of, is the community that has kind of grown around the podcast.
How do you hold on to that when the Facebook group gets so big? Like, what are some things you do to keep it feeling like a community?
So that was actually after my assistant was the first person I hired, was my community engagement manager. Of course I can't do it all because I do have all of these other things to do, but she was already an active member of the community.
Oh,
and so it felt like a very natural extension for her to be someone who helps me. I'm likely going to have to add at least one or two other people to assist with that, just because it does continue to grow. And like I said, I do want to make sure that the focus is always there. So it has helped to have people to help me with it, but also to be paying attention to like what kinds of episodes people respond to and where there need to be further discussion. If people kind of pay attention to a particular thing from a particular podcast episode, then we will bring that to the group and say, hey, so something on the recent episode was about like how to offer a good apology and like why we struggle
that was
to apologize. Yeah. And so we're having a conversation now in the Thrive Tribe about why is apologizing so difficult and how can we get better at this? And, what is a good apology? So it also feels like, paying attention to the themes and what people really respond to helps us to then kind of develop content for the actual community.
Yeah. I loved that interview, and I loved how you were kind of asking the questions that would take it deeper. Like, it wasn't just, okay, this is how you do an apology. You're like, but what do you do if the person keeps doing the same thing again and again? Like, yes.
Yeah, because I'm also thinking of the community, right? Like, I know that when I go back to the Thrive Tribe, people are going to say, hey, that was good, but what if what if my partner keeps doing this and do I keep apologizing, that kind of thing. So I also feel like when I am doing episodes, I'm keeping them in mind, like what kinds of things they want to hear.
And so you really know them well. I think that for people who are listening who have a really small community, I think that's still the key, is like, your folks really well, and you're listening to them and you're thinking about them with everything that you create and answering their questions. I think that's so key for all of us.
Yeah.
And what are you like, so there's, as it grows and grows, I'm thinking there's certain things you don't want to change, like really respecting the community. And then what are you open to changing?
So I've been thinking about like making some changes with the podcast. So right now I only interview other therapists. So it's either an interview with me and another therapist, or it's me by myself. But there definitely have been requests for like other types of people to maybe be interviewed, or for people to maybe kind of come on the podcast and share their own struggles with mental health concerns. So I'm playing with those ideas of like how the podcast might look differently as it grows. But I'm not committed to one way or another just yet.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you talked about theme days of like, this is what I do Monday, Tuesday. Are there other things that you've figured out you have to do to put boundaries around your time?
Yeah, so this is still a work in progress, Annie, but I do spend, because I think so much of my work now is not necessarily just in the therapist's office, but like is online. It definitely is harder to like not be on my phone like all the time. And so, I realize that I'm a person that really like does need to get some sleep. And so, at least a few hours, so I really feel like I have to, and like I said, I'm continuing to work on this, like to set a signal for like when it's time to put the phones down and like really unwind into the evening and stuff, because it feels like, again, I'm doing so much work online, but then when is like my playtime online, and is that confusing? So I feel like I have to get much better boundaries around like my screen time, because it definitely impacts, like I'm staying up way too late at night, just kind of playing on the phone and stuff. And I know I need to get more rest to be able to kind of continue to move at the pace I'm moving.
Yeah. Have you had moments where you have to make a difficult decision between doing something with your family or friends or following an opportunity that's coming up?
So there have been some recent trips, and I'm trying to think, what did I have to miss? It feels like, so I thought there was something that was going to interfere with like the first day of school. And to me, that feels like a non-negotiable, even though my little ones are not even in kindergarten yet, but it still feels like I want the excitement of first day of school. And, I want them to know that's a big deal. So that feels like a non-negotiable to me. And I am thinking about, like what's going on in their lives, and, not wanting to like miss things. And I'm hoping that as I grow, like I can continue to protect that, because you can't get that back, right? Like there will always be some other interview opportunity or whatever. But those first kinds of things, don't happen again.
Last time I talked to you and I asked you about how you balance being a CEO and a clinician, you said that you don't really think of yourself as a CEO. And I remember I was surprised because I was like, wow, you have so much going on and you're making stuff happen. So what would you say now about that?
Oh my gosh, I'm surprised that I said that even then. But I feel like that is pretty true, right? Because I still just don't really feel like I identify with that title. Like something about that just doesn't feel appealing for me. And I feel like that has been the struggle in growing my business, is that it is an actual business that needs like a CEO, and then I'm like, oh, but wait, that's me, because it's my business, right? And so I also feel like that is somebody else I'm going to have to add to the team, and like somebody who like that is how they think, as opposed to the therapist way that I think, because I feel like there's probably still stuff that I'm missing, again, because I don't even know that I don't know this thing. So yeah, I guess I still have not really firmly identified with that CEO title.
Yeah. And that's interesting. Since last time we talked, I've been learning more about this idea that there are visionaries and then there are integrators. And so,
yeah, I recently listened to a podcast episode from Amy Porterfield about this.
Okay, about rocket fuel, the book Rocket Fuel, and how these different roles are so important. And so definitely you're a visionary. And I mean, would you agree with that?
Yes, I would.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And so you're talking about like that, like how do you be a visionary and an integrator at the same time? Like the integrator being the person who takes action, makes all the things happen, but then letting the visionary be the person who keeps on holding the vision of the company, holding the values of the company, and really, not holding that person back. So yeah, that makes sense that you're hitting that.
Yeah.
Point. What was it like to start growing a team, like to hire an assistant?
So that, I feel like the hiring that I've done so far has all been, like I said, my community engagement person was already a member of the community, so she felt like a no-brainer. And my assistant came like highly recommended from other business women that I respect. And so to me, it also felt like a no-brainer, like, oh, if you love her, then I know I will. So far, fingers crossed, my hiring has been a good thing. But as I continue to grow, I know that I won't always be able to say, hey, does anybody have an integrator that they work with that, because that's probably not somebody that can be shared, right? If it's your person, then it's probably not like a part-time thing that they're working for multiple people. So it feels like that will be my first, like, stepping out on like blind faith person that I maybe don't even have any, previous experience with.
Right. Yeah. And so with your assistant, have you been finding that delegating and letting go of things has been easy for you, or has it been tricky to do that, to like let go of control?
Mm-hmm. It has been easier than I anticipated because I am a bit of a control freak and I like things like a particular way. But I think because she came so highly recommended and like she will anticipate things even before like I know that I need them. Like I've been able to trust that I don't have to like double check what she's doing and that kind of thing. So it has been easier than I anticipated it being.
What's been toughest? Like, what do you think of as like some of if you could talk to you a year and a half ago, what would you tell that Dr. Joy? Like, this is coming up. Like, here's how you should handle it as you grow.
I think probably to kind of maybe relax your standards about like content. Because I do feel like that is a struggle for me now is like trying to think about like what topics I want to talk about and like, okay, what is the community really asking for? What do they need? So it kind of feels like I feel like that's where I am now is like getting a better content strategy so that I'm not always stressing about like what is this week's episode going to be. So my husband, I think we talked about this before, is my producer. He does my, podcast editing and has the radio background. So he has continued to tell me like,
cool.
we need a calendar. We need a calendar. Like you need, these things. So I'm finally listening and, trying to like get ahead of stuff so that I have more breathing room. So I think if I could tell the year ago, Dr. Joy, it would be to start with a calendar and, try to relax some of the pressures around content that you maybe will think you'll have in the future.
And what's your routine with the podcast now? Do you batch, like create a bunch of interviews at a time and do it that way? Or do you just kind of go week by week?
Yeah, so I do typically batch, but I also feel like there's some part of me that really likes to like wait until, and maybe this is just a natural procrastinator, right? So typically I'm editing like the night before the release. Well, not me, my husband, clearly. But there's a part of me that wants to like see if there's something else that I need to discuss, like if something happens in the news that I want to like, be on top of. But I feel like I've given myself a little bit of luxury by adding in these things I call booster sessions. So my booster sessions,
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm so impressed when I see that you're doing booster sessions because I'm just like, wow, it's a lot to do a weekly podcast. And you're doing more. It's pretty cool.
Well, there only have been 2 in the history of the podcast. So let's not be too impressed, Annie, because I don't do them all the time. But that is the luxury of like having a live-in editor, right? Like if I wake up in the middle of the night and say, hey, I want this out tomorrow, like my husband will just oblige and, he helps me out. But so that has given me some leeway to say, okay, if there's something that happens that I feel like I want to talk about before the next regularly scheduled podcast episode, then I can just do a quick booster and, take it from there. So I do batch record, but I typically am like the day before deciding what I'm going to release, which is why the content calendar would help me to know, okay, this is coming up for the next month.
Yeah. Like as long as you could still hold on to that magic that you have. Yeah. That's cool. My editor is still my son. Nice. And yeah, it is really fun, but definitely like there's no like night before I need you to do this. It's got to be like 2 weeks out so that he has a big homework assignment. He can take care of that.
Right. So. Understandable.
But it's really neat. Like I know we talked about this a little last time. I think it's really neat to have your family involved in that way.
Yeah. And like, it feels also cool that like my kids understand kind of what I'm doing. Like they know if the door is closed that mommy's doing her podcast, and so they will hear it on the radio when I play it sometimes. And so they get what's happening. Yeah. So I've also talked to them like, oh, do you guys want to do a podcast? Like, what would you want to talk about? And that kind of thing. So it also feels like in a way, this is expanding their horizons about like what they could do in the future too.
Yeah, that's a really good point that they just see you actually creating this.
And they see daddy in the closet editing. So they know it's like a family affair.
Yes. A lot of people listening are probably feeling like, okay, so Dr. Joy has completely succeeded, has done it all. Like, what is still edgy for you? Are there certain people, like certain guests that you haven't reached out to yet, or certain things that still feel kind of edgy for you to do next?
I don't know, because I feel like I have covered a lot of ground with the topics. I am always looking at ways to do more inclusion of pop culture stuff, which is what my booster sessions tend to be about. My favorite show, I think we talked about this last time too, Insecure. I feel like I get a lot of content there. And so I'm always looking for ways to kind of add that. Like this week I did a therapist roundtable with 3 other colleagues. So there was a show on the OWN network called Love Is. And so the season finale was Tuesday. So yesterday, which was Wednesday, we did a live video, a video version of the On the Couch portion that I do when I do characters on the podcast. And that went over really well. So I feel like I always want to allow myself the flexibility to think of stuff like that and put it together so that I'm always kind of approaching content from a different angle.
Excellent. I'm wondering if there's anything else that you want to make sure that therapists who are still growing know.
Yeah, I hope that they will always remain curious and remain open to the possibilities that as much as we all typically love being a therapist, that the skills are so applicable to so many different things, right? And so I feel like I see definitely more therapists doing courses and, doing master classes and stuff like that, which is really cool. But you really just never know where this road could take you, right? And so I think to kind of really pay attention to how our skills can be used in lots of different ways and, don't cut yourself off in any one opportunity.
So, Dr. Joy, where is the best place for therapists to find you, find out about the directory, throw compliments at you?
Yeah. So the online home for everything is therapyforblackgirls.com. I'm very active on social media, more active than I need to be. You already heard me say that. So you can find me at Therapy for Black Girls on both Facebook and Instagram, and Therapy for the number 4 B Girls on Twitter.
Thank you so much for being here. It's such a treat to get to talk to you again.
Thank you, Annie. Thanks for letting me be your first repeat visitor.
Thanks for listening. If you felt supported by this conversation, please take a minute and rate us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to this. It helps us reach more people like you. I'll see you next week.